Hello, dear students. Welcome to third and the last part of the video series on uh, security in the contemporary world. So, as you remember, in the last lecture, we finished by discussing new sources of threat, and we finished the first one, that is terrorism. So, in today's video, we will discuss the other sources of threat like human right violations, uh, health epidemics, global poverty, etc. Then we'll end the lecture today with a discussion about India's security policy. So, human right violations. So, human right violations. Human rights, they human right, the word itself, the term itself can be classified into three types. So first type is political rights. So political rights, we understand freedom of speech and assembly, also the freedom to take part in elections both as a voter and as a candidate. Second is economic and social rights. Okay, so economic and social rights. By economic rights, I mean right to food security, right to livelihood, correct? Right to fair wage, uh, right right against exploitation of workers. So these are economic rights, and then come social rights. So you might remember from the grade 11 constitution book which we discussed that untouchability is banned in India. It is one of the fundamental rights. So social discrimination is a reality of any society, and we need certain rights which can protect us against the this social discrimination. So that is why we have the concept of social rights. Now, the third type is the rights of colonized people or ethnic or indigenous minorities. Now, rights of colonized people. So, like we Indians were also colonized, correct? And we have suffered a lot of trauma, both psychological and emotional trauma from colonization. We have also suffered economically, scientifically, in various ways we have suffered. So we need certain kind of special rights. Now, once I say special rights, I will ask you to remember the term that uh, unequal should be treated unequally. Correct? So ethnic and indigenous minorities. So, for example, the Adivasi population in India, they need special rights because they have been discriminated and geographically isolated from the society for a long period of time. So we need to take special steps to help them integrate and live, coexist with the current society. Now, uh, so since the 1990s, if you remember, from chapter 1, actually chapter 3, sorry, the rise of US hegemony. So Iraq invaded Kuwait, you remember that. And then there was a genocide in Rwanda, and then the East Timor conflict. So all these have led to a question that whether or not the UN should intervene to stop human rights abuses, because in all these cases UN failed to do so. UN failed, sorry. Yes. So there are two groups here. First group argues that the UN Charter empowers the international community to take up arms in defense of human rights. So if there is a human right violation, then different countries can go to war. But the second one says that national interests of the powerful states, they will determine which instances of human right violations will the UN act upon. So you might have heard these jokes where uh, whenever a new country discovers oil, US army is like, you need democracy. So no, like powerful countries, they will attack smaller countries for their own self-interest and call that we are doing it in the name of human right. So that is the argument here. Now, global poverty. So global poverty is another source of insecurity. So currently half of the world's population lives in these six countries: India, China, Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. If you take out China from here, all these are poor and developing countries. China itself is a developing country, but China is also like the second world superpower. So it's a paradox, no? Both a developing country and also a second world superpower. China, Pakistan, these are poor developing countries, and so and the most of the world population lives in these poor countries. So what is the problem here is that in the next 50 years, the population of the world is expected to triple. Even the Indian population will increase, and we will take over China as the biggest, most populous country, while the population of rich countries will shrink. So you can see that rich countries will have few people enjoying lot of resources, while poor countries will have lot of people fighting for small resources. So rich social groups get richer, whereas low income and high population growth reinforce each other to make poor states and poor groups get poorer. So what does it mean? What it means is that poverty in itself will lead to high population, because poor people cannot afford contraceptives, they do not have proper sex education, they do not have good medical health facilities, so they can enjoy the luxury of having few children, because more number of children is like having insurance for them. So poor groups will have more children, and thus more people will have less resources to share, and this will lead to a vicious cycle: more population, more poverty, more poverty, more population. So this disparity will contribute to the gap between the northern and southern countries of the world. So while the northern countries of the world will continue to get rich, the poor southern countries will continue to get poor. Now, poverty in the south, by south I mean the southern countries, has led to large scale migration to seek better life. Like most of, like I don't need to tell you this. Hyderabad itself, like it's a hub of migration. Hyderabadi people have this thing of going to the US. Like Punjabi people have this thing of going to Canada or Canada. Right? So like people from the poor southern countries, they want to migrate to US, and not everybody is able to go there, so people resort to different tactics to go there. Now international law and norms, they make a distinction between migrants and refugees. Migrants are people who voluntarily leave their countries, while refugees are people who have to forcibly leave their house because of war, natural disaster, or political persecution. Now, so like in Syria, there is a civil war going on. So refugees will go from Syria to other countries, correct? But people from India who move to USA will be migrants and not refugees. So states are generally supposed to accept refugees. So if a refugee comes to a country, they are supposed to accept them. But that is not the case in case of migrants. But there are situations when individuals and families are forced to migrate because of generalized fear of violence or due to destruction of livelihood, identities, and living environments. So sometimes there is no choice for people but to migrate, not because there is a war going on, but because there is gang violence in the streets, correct? So if a city has a lot of crime, then people will want to move out of it, correct? If there are no job opportunities, then also people will migrate. Then if there is a loss of identity and living environment, for example, a huge dam is constructed and the forest and lands of some people are submerged, then of course they will be forced to migrate. So this also leads to global poverty. Now, health epidemics. So again, we are in a health epidemic right now, coronavirus. So I don't need to explain many things. You guys are living uh, the situation here. So there are various cases of health epidemics like HIV/AIDS, bird flu, severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS virus. Corona itself is a SARS virus, severe acute respiratory syndrome. Now, the one country's success or failure in limiting the spread of disease affects infection in other countries. Of course, a lot of people are saying that China failed to limit the spread of coronavirus, and that is why the whole world is suffering. If China had acted a little earlier, then we would not have been in such a mess. Now, in North America and other industrial nations, the rich countries, new drug therapies they have lowered the death rate from HIV/AIDS, but these treatments are too expensive for poor regions like Africa. Correct? So health epidemics are also not equally affecting all the regions. Now, uh, these diseases like new and poorly understood diseases such as Ebola virus, Hunter virus, and hepatitis C have emerged. And old diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, dengue fever, and cholera have mutated into drug-resistant forms. So diseases also mutate. Corona itself is an old virus which has mutated, and that's why this new coronavirus is called the novel coronavirus 2019. So, such epidemics they demonstrate the growing interdependence of states. Each state will have to help other state. Like when other countries demanded the HQL, sorry, yeah, I think the HQL drug from India, we gave them. USA donated a lot of ventilators to India. So, like, there is a need of interdependence also. Now we have moved from new sources of threat to a concept of cooperative security. So, what is cooperative security? So, when you are dealing with these non-traditional threats to security, we need cooperation rather than military confrontation. You cannot use military to fight coronavirus or poverty, na? So, it is more effective to devise strategies that involve international cooperation. So WHO it's, right now is trying to come up with a new vaccine for coronavirus, and all it is helping all the countries cooperate and work together in that. Now, cooperative security can involve a variety of other players, so international organizations like WHO, UN, uh, IMF, now non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International, Red Cross, and also business and corporations and great personalities like Mother Teresa and Nelson Mandela. So, like these are the factors which can help in making global cooperation better to improve global cooperation. Now, also we can agree to use violence, but these must be only against international terrorists and those who harbor them. So, if a country is harboring terrorists, then of course we can use military weapons. Now, last topic which we are going to discuss is India's security strategy. So, of course, India has faced both traditional and non-traditional threats to its security, and they have emerged from within and as well as outside its borders. So India's security strategy has four broad components. So first component is strengthening its military capabilities. So India has been involved in conflicts with its neighbors. So in 1947 we had a war with Pakistan, 62 we had a war with China, 65 again we had a war with Pakistan, then 71 we had a war with Pakistan over Bangladesh. Then 1999 we had a war with Pakistan called the Kargil War. So that is why we need military capabilities because we have engaged in fight before. Now, the second component has been to strengthen international norms and international institutions. So that is why India is active in United Nations and United Nations Security Council. We want international agencies and international powers to regulate this issue. Now, the third component of India's security strategy is geared towards meeting security challenges within the country itself. So, like we have fight against Naxalism and fight against Maoism and fight against such internal issues. And last is an attempt in India to develop its economy in a way that the vast mass of citizens are lifted out of poverty and misery, and huge economic inequalities are not allowed to exist. So that is why India is growing its GDP and its economy. So people can be moved out of poverty, and everybody's quality of life can be improved. So with this, we'll end this chapter. I will see you again in the next video where we will take up a new chapter.